Welcome to another edition of We Need to Talk About Movies. Brought to you by banterflix.com. And now, here's your host, Jim McLean.
Hello. Yes, I am indeed your host, Jim McLean, Editor-in-Chief of the Banterflix Movie Review website. Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, We Need to Talk About Movies. If this is your first time checking out this pod, then welcome to the madness. If you've been listening to us for a while though, then thank you for continuing to check in. There's not much me on this episode, some of you may be relieved to hear, but I'm sure I'll be back pretty soon with more rambleness. Because on this episode, we are handing over the reins to our two favourite sleuths here at Banter HQ, Joe McElroy and Therese Ray, for another episode of Crime Scene to Screen. This is a two-part episode as Joe and Therese tackle the Zodiac Killer and also have a look at David Fincher's 2007 feature, Zodiac. This episode is all about the murders themselves, and the second part about the suspects will be released in early March. But if you can't wait until then, why not head over to our Patreon page where you'll be able to listen to part 2 right away. And there's other perks that you can get. You get your podcasts earlier. You also get a few extra episodes like the Banterflix Ramble, which we're going to be recording this week. And you can also get to watch our monthly quiz that we hold as a team. So yeah, loads there for our Patreons. So yeah, head over to the website to check that out, www.banterflix.com. That's enough from me for this week. Let's get into Crime Scene to Screen.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Crime Scene to Screen. Today we have a very special episode for you. It's actually the first of a two-parter. We're going to tackle a big hefty subject today. We are going to focus on the Zodiac Killer, who operated in the late 60s and early 70s in Northern California and is one of the most mysterious figures in all of American true crime history. As always, I'm joined by Therese Ray. Hello, Therese.
Hello, Joseph.
How
I
are
think you
you?
need to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, well, I was getting to that. But
sorry.
you've done it for me, so I've no need to do that. The awkward host that I am and introduce myself. I have no problem talking about all these horrible murders and going into gruesome detail. But when it comes to actually just saying hello, no, not for me.
You crawl back into your little cave and back into your true crime cave. Yes, I am all good. I think we're doing this for our sins, to be honest. I mean, if you are a true crime podcast lover like me and Joe, the Zodiac doesn't really be covered on very many podcasts. And normally when they are, it's like a 5 or 6 parter, to be honest. I think the last podcast on the left did like a 4 parter. All Kill and No Filler did like a 2 or 3 parter. So yeah, we're gonna
do it in 2.
We're gonna do it in 2. We're gonna do it in record time. Basically, squeeze in a decades-long mystery into.
Well, it goes right up to this day because that's where we got the
literally.
idea to do it.
Yeah,
it was literally around Christmas time they found the answer to one of the ciphers that he had, and then that sort of sprung the idea. It's like, here, let's do Zodiac. And I think we were a bit well on when we were talking to each other, going, we'll do it. We'll do Zodiac. It'd be great.
I think it was around. It was probably either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, and we were fairly on. Within our festivities, and also I think at that point we thought we were a lot bigger than what the podcast is as well. So in true form, we're just gonna do it anyway.
Well, give it a lash. That's there's nothing else to it.
No, I mean, we've tried our best to get as much of the facts, the suspects, the ciphers, the theories in as possible. But as you will can imagine, we do have to split it into 2 episodes. Again, as Joe says, which is the first 2-parter. So at the minute. I don't know about you, Joe, but I feel like a really established podcaster at the minute.
I'm feeling nervous.
Like, we've got our first 2-parter. Like, I can't wait to say part 2 of 2, part 1 of 2.
Oh, I know.
It'll probably never happen again. But, yeah, so you are you're leading episode 1.
Yeah, so like the basic plan and outline that we have for the 2-parter is the first part we're going to kind of just focus on purely I suppose you can call them the canonical murders, the murders that are actually proven and verified to have been carried out by the Zodiac Killer. And then part 2, we're actually going to go into the good stuff, the letters that he sent to authorities and newspapers, the ciphers contained within those letters, and as well as the suspects. And I think we'll probably end up concluding who we actually think the killer is, but we'll save all those theories until later.
And again, we're no experts.
No,
this is just personal opinion. So if anybody out there who's still alive, connected to the case, and we maybe think it's you, please don't come for us, because it's all just conjecture, and we're just having a wee guess.
Exactly. Really. No, because as we'll probably go into, the amount of people that have come forward and claimed who it was, we don't want to bring that kind of annoyance on.
We don't need that negative energy over here. No. It can stay in 2020. We're moving forward, and my hope for this podcast one day is to eventually solve a crime. I don't know about you, Joe. I think that's what all true crime podcasters really want. I just want to solve a crime, but I'm not speaking badly of you, but I don't think we're going to solve a Zodiac. Tell you that for free.
No, if they couldn't have, it started in 1968. And hasn't been solved by now, I don't think it's ever going to be solved. But we'll have fun going into it anyway.
Yeah. So without further ado, Joseph, I'll pass it over to you for.
I'll take her away.
Yeah. For part 1 of 2.
Yeah. So as I was saying at the very beginning of the pod, the Zodiac Killer was a mysterious male killer who was in operation in Northern California in the late 60s and early 70s. But just to give you an idea of what America was like then, it's actually not too dissimilar from now. There was a lot of civil unrest between the sort of the end of the hippie movement in San Francisco.
Because Joe was there.
I was there. You weren't there. And then obviously Vietnam was sort of kicking off around then. And then there was a civil rights movement, obviously, as well. So like you see sort of parallels with, unrest towards political figures then and now. And within this sort of, panic and paranoid times, this lovely little fella comes along and just strikes fear in the entire nation.
Loves it.
Of course, because he loves the attention, as we'll find out. So, to this day, it is known that he has murdered 5 people, but he's claimed through his letters and various releases to the press and the police that he's killed up to 37, although none of them other ones have been verified. So this is going to be the story of the most infamous sort of mystery that's plagued America and, captured the sort of imaginations of true crime around the world. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first murders that are widely attributed to the Zodiac Killer were a pair of shootings of high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday on December 20th, 1968 on Lake Herman Road, just inside the Benicia city limits. So Benicia is sort of an area just within Northern California, just as I've mentioned before. So this couple, they were just out on their first date. They'd planned on going to the big Christmas concert at their local high school, but the evening, took a different turn. They wanted a more intimate evening together. They just wanted an evening to themselves. So what happened was after stopping at a friend's house, they went to a local restaurant for a wee bite to eat. And after what would be their final meal, they drove out to Lake Herman Road to a sort of a lover's lane sort of thing. The closest thing we probably have is, a couple just driving up to Cave Hill or something like that there,
up the Hightown probably, or just off Shaw's Bridge in that wee car park.
You're more well versed than I am. I'm more of a blow-in when it comes to Belfast.
Mm-hmm.
So they pulled in to this lovers lane at around 10:15 p.m. But unfortunately, by 11, their bodies were discovered by a local by the name of Stella Borges. And then the Solano County Sheriff's Department were called to investigate the scene, but no leads were developed. And recent forensic evidence suggests that around 11 p.m., just shortly before their bodies were discovered, another car pulled up next to the couple. And it suggested that the killer had ordered the couple out of the car at gunpoint, just based on, footprints and stuff like that in and around the scene, based on the photographs that were taken afterwards, because obviously both people died, so there's no real eyewitnesses. So they were taken out of the car at gunpoint, and Betty was ordered first out of the car, David Faraday followed suit. But unfortunately, he was shot in the head first, and Betty tried to run away, but unfortunately, she was shot in the back 5 times. And it was at this point that the killer drove off. And like I said, the police had no leads or anything like that. So it was just really a random sporadic shooting with no real, rhyme or reason behind it. And nobody sort of understood, it's a tragedy, but why did this happen? So that was the first incident involving the Zodiac. So do you want to go on the next one, Therese?
Yeah. So the second infamous murder took place around 4 miles away on the 4th of July. So obviously that is American Independence, and it's a big celebration in America. So I can imagine this young couple had been out celebrating. They were found in the Blue Rock Springs in Vallejo. So similar to the first incident, the victims were a couple, and they were called Darling Farron and Michael Magoo. So again, similar sort of idea, down a lover's lane, both in their cars. Whilst parked together, another car had drove up right beside them and then pulled away, which was quite strange because, they apparently were the only two out there at that point. It was quite deserted. And regardless of anyone's intentions, when you're up there on your own and if a car pulls in and then drives away, you're going to be suspicious anyway.
Yeah.
So car pulled away, and about 10 minutes later it returned and parked directly behind them. Again, very strange. They were appeared to have been in like a car park area. There was no one else about. There was plenty of space. So obviously the car parking behind them was a bad sign. When the car was parked, the driver exited the car, branding a flashlight and a Luger handgun. He approached the couple, shone the light directly in their eyes, and then shot them 5 times. As he went to walk away, assuming that both victims were dead, he heard Michael moaning in pain. And so he returned and fired a further 2 shots at each victim before driving away.
You see, that teaches you a lesson in and of itself. If you're ever in some sort of incident like that, like heaven forbid, always play a possum.
Just literally...
Yeah, just pretend you're dead. Pretend...
Play.
Yeah.
I mean, again, never been in that situation. Can't sit there and say that I'm an expert. But if even if Criminal Minds or anything like that is to go by, just close your eyes and lay still. Like, pretend you're sleeping. Hold your breath. I don't know. Pretend you're doing a plank, like, because you obviously hold your abs and your chest as if you're not moving anyway. So just plank yourself on the ground, and there won't be any breath.
Stiff and horizontal, and you'll
literally.
be grand.
And you're. I mean, you probably won't because you'd have been shot already 5 times. But
yeah,
it might save you a bit more, and you might also have good abs. I don't know. Not poking, obviously, fun at Michael. Because he survived.
Of course not. No.
He survived. Yay!
Yes, of course. No, no means to mock him, but like, we always hear these cases, even like, having been school shootings and whatnot. I'm just thinking top of my head, Columbine. I remember reading stories about students that, just pretended to not breathe and lie face down. They were all right, but they felt like the boots of the perpetrators walking beside him. But then obviously this is a heat of the moment thing. So if you've been shot, you're hardly going to go, "Oh, hang on, I have to pass him now." So
hang on, there was that episode of Criminal Minds in season 14 where this part, you're not going to remember that. So
yeah, but anyway, sorry.
Basically, ignore everything we just said because it's a load of shite.
Yeah. This is why we'll never solve anything. But go.
No, back to the story. So the incident was reported via an anonymous call from a phone booth around 500 meters away from Farron's home. The caller reported the crime, claimed responsibility for it, and the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday a few months prior. So basically, the Zodiac called in these murders and the previous murders and claimed both, and police weren't able to trace the call. Well, they were able to trace the call, but they were never able to find out who it was on the other end.
Yeah, see, that was the thing about him. He was very, very good at covering his tracks. Like he would take sort of, it's not exactly Play-Doh, it's like cement sort of, and he would have it on his fingertips. So whenever he would make these calls, they would always find this strange residue on the phone booth,
the handle and stuff. Yeah,
and they were kind of wondering, oh well, we can't trace him because there's no fingerprints because he's all this stuff rubbed on it. So there's no way of actually tracking, who the person was. And
like DNA swabs and things like that was still in quite an infant stage back then too.
Yeah.
I don't even really know if John Douglas and those guys were rolling about yet. I'm not even sure.
I don't well, they could have been about, but I don't think they were in the the area of serial killers just yet.
Yeah. Because no doubt if they were, I'd say they probably would have been called in on this case the way it was. But unfortunately, Darlene Farron was pronounced dead at the hospital, but Michael survived the attack despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest. So small wins.
Yeah.
He described his attacker as a 26 to 30-year-old, 195 to 200 pound male, roughly 88 to 91 kilograms, or even more, roughly 5 foot 8 inches, white male with short, light brown curly hair. Which, again, for someone who was in quite a lot of terror and was quite distraught, is a pretty good description.
Yeah.
And yeah, there, as we'll go on to say, there's a lot of sketches done for the Zodiac, but again, it's just so strange that no one was ever found. So it was after these two murders, roughly about a month later, is when the famous letter started. The Zodiac sent a letter to 3 of the major newspapers claiming responsibility for the 2 murders. These were verified by local law enforcement as they contained details about the killings which not have been made public. They also had attached part of a cryptogram, which is said to have contained his identity, and this was the beginning of the ciphers as well.
Yeah. This,
along with the letters, began an insight basically into the killer's mindset. So this basically kickstarts quite a big investigation.
Yeah, this is the beginnings of Zodiac because, like you said, the first, when I was saying about the first incident, that seemed like a random sporadic attack. Again, this here seemed like a random sporadic attack, but it's these letters that sort of tie, the Zodiac Killer to both cases and sort of start his sort of reign of terror around North California.
So that is the second murder. If you want to kick off the third, Joe.
Yeah, this is probably the most famous out of all of them, to be honest. And this is the one where you see, you get the picture of the killer in action. Him in his sort of costume and everything. The sort of theatrical end of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll get into it anyway. So this happened, almost a year later. No, it was over a year later, I should say, sorry. On September 27th, 1969. This is when a pair of college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were picnicking at Lake Berryessa on a small island that was connected by a sand spit to Twin Oak Ridge. They were approached by a white man who'd worn a black executioner's hood, which was square on top, not like a sack or anything like that, just for description. The eye holes that he had for it were covered by a pair of clip-on sunglasses, so there was no way of really identifying his face. And he also wore a piece of cloth over his chest, which brandished his infamous crosshair insignia, which would become synonymous with him throughout history. He'd used that insignia before to mark off one of his first letters that he'd sent. So that was his sort of calling card and trademark as such. So
it's the circle with the cross through it.
Yeah, it looks like basically just down the scope of a sniper or something like that,
Yeah.
So armed with a handgun, he claimed to be an escaped convict. He claimed he'd killed his guard and needed a car and their money to make a break for the border of Mexico. He ordered Cecilia to tie up Brian with some clothesline wire, which he had been holding in his hand, and he'd asked her to tie Brian up, so she did so. And then at that point, when he went to tie up Cecilia, he noticed that Brian's knots weren't tied tight enough. So it was at that point he sort of went in a bit of a frenzy and drew his knife, and he'd stabbed Brian 6 times and Cecilia 10 times. So before leaving the crime scene, he went over to the couple's car and he drew his infamous symbol on the car, including the dates of the 2 previous crimes that he'd committed, along with details, in terms of their date and the total people he'd attacked and killed. And then, as before, he claimed responsibility for this killing through similar method before he called up anonymously just to say he'd done it. But then, unfortunately, as before, local law enforcement were unable to gain any sort of valid fingerprints from the scene due to similar circumstances that we've already mentioned. The couple were discovered when a man and his son who were fishing nearby found them when they were crying for help. An ambulance was called and law enforcement arrived, but law enforcement arrived first on the scene. And through Cecilia's testimony, on the spot while she was bleeding out, they were able to gain a detailed description of the attacker. But sadly, in the ambulance journey to the hospital, she'd fallen unconscious and she never woke up and died 2 days later in hospital. Hartnell, on the other hand, survived, and he was able to pass his story on to the press. And Napa County Sheriff Detective Ken Narlow, who was assigned to the case from the outset, had worked on solving the crime until his retirement in 1987. And we'll sort of see how his relationship, along with the bigger picture and the main sort of police force in San Francisco, how they work together and how that's explored in the film. But that was basically the second attack. And if you want to go into the final incident there, Therese.
This one really confused. It has always sort of confused me. Mainly because it is in no way connected to the other 3. It doesn't follow suit to the other 3. It isn't in the same place. The other 3 murders were quite nature orientated, if you know what I mean. Like, they were really outdoorsy. They were really sort of isolated.
Yeah, like you said, they're focused in like rural areas, quiet areas. You tend to focus on couples, and stuff like that. But yeah, as you'll go into it, this one seemed a bit more sporadic and out of nature compared to his previous killings.
Yeah. And I have a theory about this one, but we'll come to it later.
Oh, wow.
So the following month, October 11th, 1969, a white male passenger entered a taxi cab driven by a man called Paul Stein at the intersection of Mason and Geary in San Francisco. And he requested to be taken to Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. For reasons completely unknown, Stein drove 1 block past Maple to Cherry Street, And the passenger then shot Stein once in the head with a 9mm, took his wallet, car keys, and tore away a section of his shirt that had bloodstains on it. The murder and the passenger was observed by 3 teenagers across the street at 5 to 10, who called the police while the crime was in progress. They noticed a man wiping the cab down before walking away towards Presidio Heights, 1 block to the north. 2 police officers responded to the call and had observed a man walking along the sidewalk east on Jackson Street and stepping onto a stairway leading up to the front yard of one of the homes. And the encounter must have only lasted about 5 to 10 seconds. So it was the 2 police officers just seen some man walking down the street and didn't put 2 and 2 together, it would seem. So one of the officers estimated that the male pedestrian was around 35 to 45, which is significantly older to what Michael Magoo had described. That the man was 5'10" with a crew cut, similar to slightly older than the description of the teenagers who had observed the killer in and out of Stein's cab. They had described him as 25 to 30, crew cut, white male, and about 5 foot 8 inches tall, which is very similar to the description of Michael that Michael provided. Mm-hmm. The police radio dispatcher had, however, initially alerted officers to be on the lookout for a black suspect. So the officers drove past that man, the white man, without stopping and without any sort of suspicion. And it's something that has never been explained why these descriptions were mixed up. As Joe had touched upon around this time, there was a lot going on with civil rights. There was still a real struggle for black people in the black community in America. So it could be assumed that they were just being racist and immediately went that it wouldn't be someone of a upstanding white community that would do this type of thing.
Yeah, because the area itself was supposed to be, quite affluent for where it was. So like you said, the idea of like a white person doing this in like an upstanding neighborhood was just almost unthinkable. Like it would have been clearly have to been perpetrated by someone who's like deemed a degenerate or lesser, and not there. Like I'm obviously being sarcastic. It's hard to tell, sorry, over audio, but like I am just air quotes.
Yeah, I can say them and I can verify that you are quoting. So after this, a search ensued. No suspects were ever found, as we all know to this day. And this was the last official confirmed murder by the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah. So, he did play around with cops from now until about 1974, with letters which were deemed like official Zodiac letters, where he would like threaten to. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to mention that because that's for the next part. But yeah, it was more or less back and forth, issuing threats, and a
lot of pandering between the news and the police and the Zodiac as well.
And eventually, the infamous composite sketch, which I'd put on my Instagram earlier when I was trying to get sort of ideas from the good people listening as to whether or not who they thought was the killer and not there. But obviously, that's something for part 2. But yeah. The main detectives on the case were Bill Armstrong and Dave Toschi, and they were said to have investigated about 2,500 different people linked to the case.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Just wild.
So the last real letter from Zodiac came in 1974. In it, he referenced The Exorcist, where he said it was like the greatest satirical comedy he'd ever seen. And he signed off the letter basically saying, me equals 37, San Francisco Police Department 0. So he indicated I'd killed 37 people, most of that you don't know about, and you have yet to catch me. But like I said, when we go into the letters in the next episode, we'll go into this stuff in more detail. But that's sort of where the Zodiac story in terms of, you know, the murders ends.
And it sounds like it was very brief.
Uh-huh.
But like anyone else, we're only able to report on the 4 official murders that were investigated. To me, he was an extreme narcissist and thought very highly of himself. And there is a good chance that he did murder 37 people. I would say it's very highly likely. But in my mind, if he had killed close to that number, you would have heard a lot more from him.
Exactly. I think it's, you know, I have a theory about, you know, why, you know, the prominent main killings stopped. I think it was this incident here that sort of spooked him. The fact that he came so close to getting caught without him realizing that, you know, the police didn't know who he was. That sort of scared him into hiding, to the point he was like, I'll feel safe and comfortable if I hide behind my ladders, build myself up to be the big man, and just claim every so often in the ladders, I've killed this amount of people now, I've killed this amount of people now. And then obviously he ends it off with 37. And then I have another theory that links to why he stopped the ladders when he did, but that'll come in the next part. So that's basically, yeah, like you said, that's the Zodiac murders, the official canonical murders. So I think the next thing we should do is actually go into the film that was based around it, 2007 film by David Fincher. So before we actually get into that, I'm just going to play a clip from the film.
Paul, what's on the crime beat?
Janice in Datebook left the fondue party before everyone got naked. That's a crime. Just seen her. Wouldn't kid you.
Maybe the beginning of a crime wave.
You need to see this.
Go get the publisher.
Dear editor, this is the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know. Christmas, brand name of ammo, Super X. 10 shots were fired. The boy was on his back with his feet to the car. The girl... Would you read that, please?
The girl was on her right side, feet to the west. 4th of July. 1. Girl was wearing patterned slacks. The boy was also shot in the knee. Brand name of ammo was Western. Here is part of a cipher. The other 2 parts of this cipher are being mailed to the editors of the Vallejo Times and SF Examiner. I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper. In this cipher is my identity. If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Fry, F-R-Y, 1st of August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Fry night. I will cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with 12 people over the weekend. It's unsigned except for a symbol.
Is it me? Does that look like a gun sight?
Okay, that was a clip from Zodiac, like I said, the 2007 by David Fincher. So before we really get into the comparisons between real life and the film, what did you actually think of the film, Therese? Where does Zodiac sit for you in the grand scheme of fictional true crime films?
To be honest, I've seen Zodiac 3 times. Pardon me. The first time was a good few years ago. I think it was on Film 4. And I wasn't as sort of like obsessed with true crime as I am now. And I found it really long. Like, it's really long. And I think the first time I watched it, I don't even think I finished it. And then it was a good few years later, I'd been listening to a few podcasts, and it had been added to Netflix, and I decided to give it a go. And when you do look at the cast list, there's some massive names in it as well. Mm-hmm. And second and third time around, you can't deny that it's not a great story. Yes, it's based on true events. And 9 times out of 10, when you get films that are based on true events, they try to stay as close to the story as possible, but we do get some deviation. And to be honest, I feel like this film stuck quite true to the happenings and the investigation.
Well, that's why I really like it. I was a bit like you. The first time I seen it, I thought, it just wasn't for me, and it was just all right. But obviously, as I've grown older and like yourself, have a greater sort of love and affinity for true crime. That's when it started to interest me more, and then when I actually, listened to some pods in Zodiac, read up about him, even before preparation for this here, I was like, maybe I should give this another go. And then I eventually did in preparation for this, just watched it the other night again. And I think it's just outstanding. I think it's one of those things, the more you sort of know about it going in, the more you get out of it. But at the same time, on its own, it's a great
thriller.
It's a great thriller and crime film. Yeah, absolutely. And I think why it's so great and why it works so well is the fact that it's based off, someone who was really involved in the case, Robert Graysmith. It's based on his novel Zodiac from the early 90s. And, as you can see from the film, he was completely obsessed with it. Like I thought I was bad. And I think you probably thought the same, the amount of research you did for it. But then when you see what he did, and I think he even is quoted as saying, after reading the script, going, "No wonder my wife left me." The amount of obsession I had with this here, and it's obviously shown in the film. But I think that's there's two reasons why it really works for me. One hand, it's a really enthralling, to catch a killer thing. It's like a whodunit. Is like
murder mystery.
Yeah, exactly. There's this mysterious killer on the loose in San Francisco. The whole city's paranoid with it, and these small, it's just focused on a small group of people who are trying to solve the case, and how there's conflicts of interest and ideas, and who they think done it, and that's just it's just what's enthralling, because then you start to question yourself, going like, who is it? I know the film eventually points to one particular person, and then that's the person we'll get into in the next episode. Mm-hmm. But the other reason I loved it is how it's really just a film about obsession, and how damaging obsession can be, because you see how it affects the three main characters, because the film does follow three main people. It's Robert Graysmith, who's played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who's like a cartoonist at the newspaper, who then just completely devotes himself to Zodiac after, receiving just one cipher. Then there's Paul Avery, his co-worker, who's a journalist at the same paper, and something similar happens to him. His he physically becomes debilitated because of trying to solve this thing, and his obsession coupled with alcoholism just makes things worse. And then there's Dave Toschi, who's one of the main inspectors in the case, played by Mark Ruffalo, and how he's just constantly going in loops trying to figure out a way of catching the killer. So that's sort of where I sit with Zodiac. How do you think it this episode is focused on the murders? How do you think, from reading about the cases compared to how they're presented on screen, how do you feel about that there, Therese?
Well, the opening scene depicts the attack on Darlene Ferrin and Mike Magoo, and it's very play by play, based on the description that we were able to provide there. You see the two of them in basically in isolation. Looks like they're up in it looks like a mountain or like a hill or something like that. They're both talking, and car drives past, slows down as it comes to them, and then drives on, comes back, parks up beside them. No lights are on, completely black. They can't see who's in the car, drives off. The car then comes behind, and this is where you see the famous hulking figure, the lugger gun on one hand and the torch in the other, and he walks over. And I wouldn't I've seen really violent true crime films. I wouldn't put Zodiac up there as extremely violent, but they certainly don't shy away from the actual murders themselves. You see Darlene getting shot 5 times, quite brutally. You see Mike getting shot in the face quite brutally. And this is the start of a film. Like, if you don't know anything about Zodiac going into it, you kind of understand what you're getting from it from the get-go. It's not going to be a happy story.
No.
It's certainly not going to be something that's going to leave you happy. So I think it's very true. And then moving on to the murder of the couple at the lake, as soon as you were describing it, I immediately pictured that scene where you just see Zodiac coming over the hill, Hulk, almost like, I don't want to compare him to Shrek, but the build, he looks so hulky and sunk over, like Shrek.
I don't mean to laugh, but I could just picture him coming over a hill and just telling them, "Get out of my swamp."
I know, it's the way.
No offense to the ones who died, but like, obviously, it's just
it's the way he's dressed. Like, he's almost wearing like a smock as well. Yeah. Like, it's like a smock and then the hood, and he's just there. There's one shot and he's just standing there. And it goes back to the girlfriend, and she's just, looking over her boyfriend, and she just sees him. And it's exactly like the sketch, like completely. Mm-hmm. The vest with the circle and the square on it. And, even their murder, it's pretty close up, and he's just stabbing them. And I don't think, in comparison to the murders, I don't think it's offensive in any way. I think it depicts what happened really well. And yes, for the family members and things like that, I would say they've obviously had to have some sort of sign off. David Fincher would have had to have contacted them and things like that.
Well, the thing about your fella Magoo, like you were talking about, they actually hired a private detective to find him because he
went into hiding.
He went completely off the radar. But yeah, it's that's Fincher for you. He's always been a sucker for attention to detail. And I'd sent you a video before this. He went out to the scene with, I don't think he went out with Hartnell, who, the survivor of that incident.
It was one of the police officers, I think he went.
That's right, yeah. He went out, I don't know if it was Toshi or not, but it was definitely one of the police officers, like you were saying. And he was just listening to the area. He was like, hang on, the sound isn't traveling well here, it doesn't make sense. Why would it be here? And then he just pointed to another area. He was like, I think it might be over there. And then sure enough, the police officer went, you know what, you're right. We're in the wrong place. And then he knew exactly that's where the events happened. And I was actually reading more as well, to make it look more like it was at the time. He flew in trees to be planted at the scene. Like, you see like the trees that the Zodiac.
Yeah, they're quite big, yeah.
Yeah, they weren't there. He got them purposely planted in there. Like, that's what I mean. He's just such a sucker for attention to detail and just being completely as accurate as possible. And, like I was saying before, I think that's why the film is just as brilliant as it is, because he sort of leaves no stone unturned in going into this case. Like, it's a very dense film, but also a very rewarding one if you stick with it.
Yeah. How did you think it depicted the murders and as well depicted the main 3 characters? How you feel Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, and Robert Downey Jr. portrayed those characters as well?
Well, a bit like yourself, the murders are obviously very harsh in the way they're depicted, but no way did I find them gratuitous. Like, it was just very matter of the fact. It's like, these are the descriptions in the accounts that were given. I'm going to show you it exactly for what it is. It's not going to be gory or bloody or over the top. It's like, if somebody gets shot, they're going to get shot. If somebody got stabbed, they got stabbed. It's not a case of we'll linger on at this incident. We'll go in slow motion as the knife plunges in and out of someone. It's just he goes there, he stabs him, scene ends.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought it was really good. And when I found out about Magoo as well and Hartnell, what they felt in terms of how those events were depicted and how they wanted to get involved. They were very hesitant, but at first, but then when they realized what Fincher was going for, they kind of were of the ideas like if somebody's going to be that accurate, they're going to be that respectful towards it, because obviously they were sort of familiar with his work. Because prior to this, the only sort of thing closest to it he'd done was Seven, and that's a very highly stylized,
grotesque film.
Grotesque murder mystery. I know. So when you think about that, he's going to do Zodiac, you're like, slight alarm bells. But then when he met with them, he told them his intentions and how he was going to be very mature towards it, and responsible. They're like, okay, that's great. Well, you have our blessing as such. Just try and make it as honest as possible and respectful as possible. And I think he did. In terms of the characters who played, the actors who played the characters, I don't know an awful lot about actually Grace Smith or Tashi or Paul Avery, but they, the portrayals just felt like really authentic people. Like Jake Gyllenhaal as Robert Graysmith, he does seem like this fella who's just sort of, withdrawn. Obsessive, yeah. He loves books, he loves puzzles and stuff, as he says. And then when he's meeting Paul Avery for drinks, it's like, that's your idea of fun. Like, he can't make sense of it because, he's someone who's a bit of a barfly. He loves hanging about, as soon as he's finished in the office writing the story, he goes straight to the bar. And even Robert Downey Jr. is quite good. Like, some people criticize him for being too over the top in the way he portrays things, but it's just, I think he's perfect for what he does with Paul Avery. Having said that, when I was reading a bit more on Paul Avery, apparently it wasn't as bad as the film portrays. Like, the film portrays he just lost everything. He lost his job. He's basically living in a boat by the end of the film. Like, he still was married. He died. He still did the odd article for the newspaper. He didn't write as much because that was mainly down to his health more than anything. And then funny, David Tashi, he's been known to be, the ultimate detective in San Francisco history.
Poster boy.
Yeah, like they based Dirty Harry off of him, apparently. Which is a bit funny because the first Dirty Harry film, the villain in it is based off Zodiac.
Yeah.
It's obviously a very heightened version of it, if you've ever seen the film. But all in all, I think they did a very good and solid job in those roles, and as well as the supporting cast. Obviously, there's certain characters we're going to go into in part 2, but the rest of them are very solid in their roles, and they just feel like real people, reacting to this huge event that was taking place at the time. But what did you think of them, Therese, and the sort of cast in general?
Yeah, again, I would be in the same mindset as you. I don't know the 3 men personally. But I think specifically with Robert Graysmith, if you read more sort of into him, and even around like the Zodiac Wikipedia and stuff, Jake Gyllenhaal is quite good at playing an obsessive, compulsive person. He's great in Nightcrawler. But yeah, like there's some weird amount of authenticity with them all, and the behavior. You do almost feel like it's not Mark Ruffalo playing a character, that Mark Ruffalo was actually Dave Toschi, because they really seem to throw themselves into the role, and there's such a wide variety of cast. We've got Chloe Sevigny plays Jake Gyllenhaal's wife. She's great at being a love-struck wife. She's played it loads of times. We'll have Dermot Mulroney as well. He plays the captain in the San Francisco department, and then there is all the minor roles of the other detectives that they basically all team up with. Donald Logue as Ken Narlow, which he's featured quite heavily. And then Sergeant Jack Mullinax, played by Elias Coutes. And those names, probably you're going, I have no idea who those people are, but you see it and you go, oh, he was in such and such, and he was in such and such, and they've all played similar roles in other films.
Character actors.
But with that, every single person who plays a character in the film, regardless if it's a big role or not, I do think they apply their method in a really realistic way. And I think that helps tell a story, obviously, but in a weird way, it's also respectful toward any of the family or the legacy of those that were murdered, because it isn't over the top and it isn't, really dramatized or really fabricated. I would imagine Paul Avery was quite an eccentric person. He was a journalist who worked at like a newspaper. Like, people who work in media, me and you both know, like, they're not the most sane people.
No.
Jake Gyllenhaal, he is a bit of a obsessive in it, but he was also a graphic artist, and a lot of his work would be time consuming and quite detailed, and that's reflected in his acting. So as you've repeated, you've talked about it before, it is a dense film. There's a lot to deal with, there's a lot to digest. If you don't know anything about the Zodiac and you come to completely blind, it can be hard to get into, but it's a slow burner, and I think that it does kick off in the assistance with the actors and the characters that they play. I think if they didn't have such a leading cast, I don't know how the reaction would have been for people. I don't know how it would have been fared. If there was lesser known actors, would it have been put down to something, on the lines of like a true movie or something like that? I don't know. But yeah, I think when you put it all, when you bring it back down to its most bare, it's a really good story that is also a true story, if you get me. Some of it you look at it and go, this couldn't have happened like this. There could, a man couldn't have just walked down to a lake dressed in an executioner's outfit like that. That's something that you would make up off the top of your head, but it did happen.
Yeah, you look at slashers, like, they're always in costume.
They're always masked, yeah.
Same way, but it was real.
It was real, and it was depicted in the most realistic way possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's what I mean. It's just it's attention to detail and its accurate depiction of the events and everything. It just all comes together and just enthralls you and really, makes you intrigued about what's there. But I think that's probably a good place to sort of leave us for now, at the end of part one. So yeah, like I said, that was part one, the murders. So part two, we're actually going to go into, the letters, the ciphers, and of course the good stuff, the suspects. And we'll bring in more about the film then. Obviously, we didn't want to go into it all now because it's very important as our podcast that we bring in both aspects into both episodes. But that should be us for now. In terms of us Banterflix, please keep an eye out on our website and visit it and listen to our main pod. We need to talk about movies. There's going to be a lot of great stuff planned for this year, as well as several side projects. Victoria's going to be continuing her Disney project. I believe Darren's still going to be continuing his music project. And there's still another few things that we're just not going to announce yet. We'll leave that up to Jim, our Commander-in-Chief. And as well as that, please, check out our Patreon. We've got a lot of good stuff there. The link for it can be found through our website, bannerflix.com. And we're on all sorts of social media. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, and we are on Instagram, amongst others. So please check us out there, just for all the latest news and reviews and whatnot. So without further ado, I think that's everything. So thanks very much, Therese.
Thanks, Joe, for having me, as always.
Oh, yes. And thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon for part 2.
Bye.
This has been We Need to Talk About Movies. Thanks for listening. For more information, visit banterflix.com. See you next time.